Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elias Mahlum Priest, and today I will be presenting my term presentation, and I will be focusing on natural resource management in the context of agricultural conservation. Specifically, I chose agricultural conservation because privately owned crop, pasture, and rangeland account for nearly half of the land in the United States. And given the enormity of agriculture's footprint on our land, farmers and ranchers have a critical role to play in sustaining our nation's natural resources. Personally, I believe agriculture sits at an ethical crossroads. First off, agriculture is considered a wicked problem because it is a required action to feed the world population, but it also is one of the most harmful activities that people do to the natural environment. For example, agriculture currently accounts for 25% of total global greenhouse gas emissions, and it is estimated by the year 2050 we will need an additional 593 million hectares of land to be able to properly feed the world's population. For reference, this is nearly twice the size of India. Then, to compound that problem even further, there were surveys done in the United States to indicate that only a third of growers are aware of groundwater problems at the farm or state level. Agricultural practices are such a contentious point that they've actually been identified as one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. More precisely, they want to have a goal of zero hunger, which is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. For the figures that they represented on their website, food insecurity was already on the rise from 23.2% in 2014 and had moved up to 26.4% in 2018. And issues surrounding COVID have actually increased these numbers even more. During that same time frame, childhood stunting and wasting are likely to worsen. It's been identified that over 144 million children under 5 are stunted, and 47 million children are affected by wasting. It has also been identified that current farm policies reward overproduction of vast monocultures without basic resource conservation practice and negatively impact soil, streams, lakes, and air. So, on one hand, we have to work to end the goal of hunger, but at the same time, we cannot incentivize the practice of destroying our natural resources. So, where do we go? As of right now, I believe there are three separate pieces of existing policies that help shape the development of agriculture. First off, being the Farm Bill, which is a piece of legislation that includes a wide spectrum of programs and reflects Congress's priorities for America's food and agricultural system. These programs include nutrition, such as SNAP, conservation programs, and crop insurance. Next, we have the Clean Water Act, which began in 1972 as amendments to the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, which was passed with the goal of restoring and maintaining the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's water. On a side note, there has been legislation passed that there are exceptions for agricultural in their 404 permit program. So the future of agriculture is being shaped by the Clean Water Act, but there are certain forms of agriculture which are exempt then from having to conform to the Clean Water Act. And lastly, it's the Endangered Species Act, which protects all endangered species using all methods and procedures necessary to bring all endangered or threatened species to a point of not being considered as such. Now, as mentioned before, we are going to need 583 million hectares of land. So how do we move agriculture forward by also maintaining the Endangered Species Act, working within the confines of the Clean Water Act, and promoting the correct economic incentives with the Farm Bill? Now to check on a few examples of how the existing policies are affecting our current agricultural system. First one being Texas has lost 580,000 hectare of irrigated cultivated cropland, and this is mostly due to dwindling groundwater supplies, which was noted at earlier in the presentation that a third of farmers and ranchers had no idea what their impacts were on groundwater. Next, according to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, $144 million a year in management costs are used for grazing livestock on federal land, but only collects $21 million in grazing fees. So there's a difference of $123 million that has to be accounted for with federal budget. Next, according to the National Survey of State Information on Surface Water, maintained by the U.S. EPA, the U.S. has more polluted water than clean water. Next, federal agencies, for the most part, devote fewer resources to introduce non-indigenous species that lack an economically effective constituency. So, if there's not a viable economic reason why we should address an endangered species, we will not do so. And in July 2011, the Soil and Water Conservation Society issued a statement warning that climate change is exacerbated by current agricultural practices due to accelerated erosion and water usage exceeding water storage replacement. Now, these are just a handful of things that are happening within our agricultural system. I wanted to specifically look on groundwater usage and the Farm Bill and the mechanisms that are being used for it. And from all of these, we found that they're not working as they should. The next question is, what kind of ethical approaches can we put into agricultural conservation that will make for some improvement? The first one I have identified is addressing the issue of intrinsic value for ecological services. More specifically, it has been noticed that agricultural and farmers have been kept out of the formal carbon market that is estimated to be worth around $100 million. And more specifically, traditional farming is considered climate resistant and less harmful to the environment. So by economically evaluating and paying out to the agricultural community things that we are trying to do inside of the industry, we can have a greater uptake in agricultural conservation for those goals. Next, we have the implementation of more local ecological knowledge. The idea is that agriculture cannot be a system that solely produces an output. It needs to be a case-by-case event that a farmer must identify as the best option. This is worked against in the Farm Bill, where there's only certain subsidies and crop insurances that are given out to certain crops. So it will continue the cycle of wanting to grow corn, soybean, and cotton in areas that they may not thrive. But if they don't produce, they still get backed by the federal government as a crop insurance. And lastly, to be paired with the local ecological knowledge, is more collaborative governance. Aligning sustainability priorities between research, policymakers, and farmers will be essential to achieve a more sustainable agricultural sector. In the survey done, pointed out earlier about the 1 in 3 don't know about their usage of groundwater on their water levels. Well, during that survey, they also identified that scientists knew that the groundwater was being lowered to unhealthy rates, and policymakers were trying to create the policies for farmers so they'll stop doing that. But it was identified that 1 in 3 didn't know. So if we are able to have a collaborative interaction there between farmers, policymakers, and researchers, we can have a more holistic approach to changing the way we do agricultural conservation. As for my recommendation, as part of the Clean Water Act, we can understand the intrinsic value that wetlands and water management has and tie economic incentives to it. For the implementation of local ecological knowledge, we can decentivize industrial farming in the Farm Bill and more incentivize for producers that protect and rebuild soil and work towards agricultural conservation. And for collaborative governance, we need to include all members of the decision process whenever we try to make a decision, because it is a very complex system and we need multiple perspectives. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can email me at the email address below. Thank you.